Do that.
Good.
I probably should have said elsewhere.
What?
I'm like, oh,
No, you're like in the perfect, and the three of us actually, this is the best I've seen it.
those owls are amazing.
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
those at our
If
office.
she's online, you have to admit her.
Yeah,
2 people are in the waiting room.
I don't know if I'd let David in.
Allison, is that you?
Oh, she-
Great. Allison?
Uh,
might have
she's
to
muted.
unmute
so yeah, it does.
Hey, Allison. Oh, there you are. Good.
Hello.
Good, good, good. No, I can't get rid of the screen. How about that? Hey, there you are. Can you see us?
Yes, it looks like my face is really big on the screen. I can see it in the video.
Well, actually, because some people, that's happened to some people, so we have a small screen for you, and then I put the presentation up on a big screen, because it's all
Great.
about pictures today.
Yeah.
Was David in?
it.
I thought so. Hold on. We have a new process for letting people in.
I'm in.
Oh, there he
Okay.
is.
It's interesting that you don't see the other people.
Well, we see Allison.
Yeah.
I don't know what.
The view thing.
Yeah,
Could go to
you have to
the
change it to a gallery.
matrix one.
Oh, that's what, we don't need to see David, that's okay.
I kind of liked it before.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
think we'll leave it at that.
Okay,
So I'm going to try to give you permission to present, Allison, and then we'll go from there. It may or may not work, but
So it doesn't. We planned for that.
it's 6. I was hoping Joe was going to be here
I haven't heard from Joe.
because I got a text from him yesterday, but we'll get the meeting going.
Yeah,
So let's call, we have to do a couple administrative things and then we'll get the meeting going.
Sure.
So let's call the meeting to order at 6 p.m. on April 16th, 2025. Are there any changes or adjustments to the agenda that anybody would like?
Nope.
We're good. Changes to the March 2025 minutes. I sent those out a little bit ago.
yeah, I
So-
found the one thing that I didn't recheck, but I assume you changed
I
that.
changed it.
So I would make the motion that we approve the minutes from the March meeting.
Motion to approve the March 2025 minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do you, I think that was before you corrected my address or my email address, I think. I think you have it right now because I wasn't getting things.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm pretty sure you've got a couple things from me recently.
yep, I did get it recently. I didn't get the March minutes, but yeah.
Okay, great. Are there any public comments? Excellent. All right, let's move on to our guest speaker. So I'm going to, again, Allison, I'm going to try to give you control.
Okay.
And I'm following the directions. Select co-host. Okay. Raise hand. Host. Whoops.
Host tools.
I don't want to remove you. Open button, select co-host. Just give me one more minute, otherwise we'll move to our default mode, Allison.
That's fine.
Can she request it?
I don't think so. Do you have any buttons that request?
Can actually, hold on. All right, I sent a
Oh,
request.
there we go. Look at that.
Okay. So I will try and share here and
Good.
see how that goes. I want to share this one, I think. Okay. All right. You seeing it?
We do not.
Oh
I
no.
see it.
You might have to click on the green bar up the top.
Makes us clear.
There we go.
There,
There we go.
okay.
Okay, so now just give me a second.
Okay.
This is great.
I'm impressed on it.
The tech wizard he is.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I didn't do anything. Allison just pushed the right button. Hold on one second.
I wasn't sure because we don't use Zoom. We use Teams for everything. So I have no idea how any of it works, but I did notice that there was a send request button.
There we go.
there.
We are good.
All
All
right.
right, I'm impressed. This is exciting.
Great.
Right.
All right. So ready for me to go?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, first, thank you for inviting me to come to your committee meeting today. My name is Allison Marchioni. I am the Shoreland Restoration Ecologist for Vermont DEC. I work in the Lakes and Ponds program. And today I'm going to give you all a little crash course in shoreline erosion project identification. So we are going to talk about a bunch of things related to shoreline erosion. We're going to talk about what is the shoreline zone. We're going to go over some types of erosion.
Hey, Allison, can you pause for a minute? The screen is.
You might just have to go back to this one, which is not a problem.
It might be trying to flip that. Oh. Move the table.
Okay, you're good to go. Thank you.
So back to the overview. We're going to talk about what is the shoreline zone, types of erosion, types of bioengineering projects, which are sort of vegetative lake-friendly practices to fix erosion problems. We're going to go a little bit over how do you know what you're looking at while you're looking at it with some examples. Talk a little bit about project funding, and then we'll also talk a little bit about what about all that upland stormwater. So on we go. This is an image of the shoreline zone. This particular image is more about the Shoreline Protection Act than it is about anything that I'm necessarily talking about, but it is a good description in picture form of what the shoreline zone is. So when we're talking about the shoreline zone, it's the first 250 feet from the mean water level moving back into a property. And for funding purposes, when it comes to state funding, when we're talking about shoreland projects, those have to be within the first 250 feet of the property. So that's why I want to just talk about what is considered a shoreland zone. And we're going to, when we get to talking about what kinds of projects, I will be differentiating between some of the upland stormwater projects and the actual shoreland restoration projects, which must be within 250 feet of the shoreline. This is an image showing a couple of, well, most of the different types of erosion that occur on lake shores. This is from the Vermont Bioengineering Manual, which we will talk about a little bit more later, but you'll see a lot of sort of illustrated photos in this presentation. They're all from the Vermont Bioengineering Manual. They were all done by Holly Greenleaf, who's fantastic. And this is showing all the different types, and we're going to go through them one by one. So let's get right into that. This is an example of scour erosion. Scour erosion is caused by waves coming up onto the shore and pulling back the sediments. So this is what it would typically look like. It would typically have a slope like that. And you can tell that it is from the waves and not necessarily from the upland based on where the erosion is occurring. So instead of having the next kind of erosion we're going to talk about, which are rills coming from the grass side, it's all coming from the wave side. Rill and gully erosion looks like this. Gullies are pretty easy to imagine. They're one point on the land, usually a low point where the water is all coming together and taking the soil away with it down into the water. So this is a very small gully here. You can get gullies that are huge. But typically we're probably looking at smaller gullies or rill erosion. Rills are just smaller, basically, gullies. This is another example of a even less formed gully or area of, this is really more like rill erosion. Bare soil on the lake shore. This is where stormwater from upland areas are washing those sediments into the lake. Ice is another culprit when it comes to erosion. This is where ice forms and pushes up against the shoreline, and in really extreme cases like this picture, it is creating a huge berm basically by pushing the land back away from the water. This is another extreme example. You can get these in much smaller berms from ice, but these two pictures that I happen to have, both of which I think were on Maidstone Lake, were really extreme examples of ice. Undercutting is another really common one that we see a lot. That's when vegetation is holding on to the top of the bank, but the water is cutting away underneath the bank. So it's mostly from waves or wakes, like I mentioned with the first scour erosion, but this is happening maybe a little more aggressively, and you have that overhang, which means it's coming from the same source, waves, but the way that you fix it might be different. This is another example of undercutting where you can see, that tree is holding on to the shore for dear life, and the water is just all the way underneath that bank. Another somewhat common one, and one I've seen on Lake Champlain a couple of times, is what we call mass wasting, which is a fancy way basically of saying it's kind of like a small landslide, where the bank is the top layer of the bank is coming away from the rest of it, and as a sheet kind of falling down a hillside. This is on Lake Champlain in Benson, I think. This was caused by the removal of the hillside vegetation and heavy rains. And finally, I skipped ahead. This one is outfall scour. This happens with culverts, but it can also happen with any sort of pipe that's discharging water. So culverts, apron drain or curtain drain outflows, and gutters, when they're perched, like this one is kind of above the ground, the water is going to hit the ground with force and start to wash the soil away. So this often happens, especially when people are trying to do the right thing and manage the stormwater around their homes. They'll put in pipes to kind of move the water to different places, but then they perch those pipes on slopes and start washing away in just a different spot. So outfall scour is second to last. The last one here is just bare soil and a lack of vegetation. You can have a bare soil and a lack of vegetation and not have erosion, but it is like a perfect breeding ground for erosion, let's say. So here we have a big open lawn, and I'm going to call it bare soil. This is actually a beach area. But there is the potential here for stormwater to run over that lawn, hit the bare soil, and wash it into the water. And so we're trying to prevent that by encouraging vegetation and, where possible, no bare soil. So in this particular case where it's a beach, there would still be bare soil, but if you're talking about on someone's lawn or some other kind of area, we'd really encourage some kind of vegetation rather than just having bare dirt. So those are the types of vegetation and some photo examples. I do want to talk a little bit about what is sort of unique about Lake Champlain, since you are out there on the islands. And maybe you probably know all this stuff already because you live out there. But you know, Lake Champlain is a unique lake within our state. I talk about inland lakes a lot, and I just wanted to clarify what an inland lake is versus what Lake Champlain is. So an inland lake is any lake that is fully contained within the borders of our state. So the three lakes that are not inland lakes are Lake Champlain, Lake Memphremagog, and Wallace Pond up in the Northeast Kingdom. They all have borders with Canada, and Lake Champlain also borders with New York. It can also mean, when I'm talking about it, any lake that's not Lake Champlain. So I'm often referring to inland lakes and Lake Champlain. It kind of is two different things, because Lake Champlain is significantly larger and much deeper. It is the 9th largest freshwater lake in the country. It is much bigger than any of our other inland lakes. And because it is so much bigger and so much deeper, it is subject to more intense weather. So it has higher wind. That higher wind creates more waves that are really big, creating a lot of high energy areas that are then prone to erosion. And when wind is high on Lake Champlain, waves can reach 3 to 5 feet in height on some parts of the lake. I wouldn't be surprised if they were sometimes bigger than that. So it's important, I think, to kind of acknowledge that, especially if we're talking about Lake Champlain, erosion is going to be very different there than it is on some of the inland lakes. And sometimes the problems are much more significant and therefore also more difficult to fix. Just something to think about as we go through this conversation. I'll also say soil type and bedrock can also really influence how and where erosion happens. Soil type is really site specific. So I'm not going to get into that, or I could probably give a whole lecture on soil science. But I will say the bedrock, specifically for North Hero, I did look this up. It's mostly the Stony Point Formation, a dark gray calcareous shale with beds of bluish gray limestone. So we're all kind of familiar with those like limestone rock beaches and sort of the cliffs that can come from the erosion of those areas. And I will show a couple pictures of those sorts of erosive spots a little later on in the presentation. So I would be remiss to do any kind of presentation without somehow talking about funding. I'm going to keep this conversation kind of based around what DEC considers a good shoreline restoration project and what is a fundable project. So I did want to include this information. It is from the Clean Water Initiative Program's funding policy around what we consider to be a shoreline restoration project. I'm just going to read this because it might be a little small. It's a little small on my screen. High priority lake shoreland habitat restoration projects and/or lakeshore nutrient sediment pollution reduction structural practices at priority locations within 250 feet of the lakeshore. Designed practices must be listed in the bioengineering manual or otherwise have the support of Vermont DEC Lakes and Ponds program. So that is the general description of like what is going to count. It has to be listed in our bioengineering manual, or you have to have the support of Vermont DEC Lakes and Ponds program, which really means me and our permitting staff need to be on board. We have had one project that was like a experimental kind of stabilization project that we did permit, and it has turned out really well. It was stabilizing shores with basically driftwood. It was a very cool project, but it's not listed in our bioengineering manual, but we worked with that contractor to do that project. Things that are not going to be fundable shoreline projects are for sure retaining walls or riprap. Any kind of hard structural fix is not going to be a fundable project through our programs. We're really looking at funding bioengineering, which, as I mentioned before, is more of like softscaping and shoring up the shoreline using plants, usually along with some biodegradable materials. I'll get into all of those in just a moment. And another note on funding, there are 2 funding sources available from Vermont DEC for shoreline restoration projects. Those are the EDDIBG, Enhancement Development Design Implementation Block Grants, Those focus on protecting high quality waters, improving water quality, restoring degraded waters, creating resilient watersheds and communities, and supporting the public's use and enjoyment of state waters. That's a really kind of broad bucket of money for water quality projects. And then there's the Clean Water Service Provider, which you're probably familiar with already. Those projects focus almost not exclusively, but almost entirely on phosphorus reduction for the project and the phosphorus to cost ratio of the project. I will say I have seen some shoreline restoration projects go through Clean Water Service Providers and get funding. I've seen a lot more go through the design and implementation block grants and get funding, because these are kind of expensive projects. So it's really hard to get that phosphorus to dollar ratio right for the Clean Water Service Providers. This is the Vermont Bioengineering Manual that I was talking about. It was created in 2022. It is a fantastic resource. It covers common site challenges, how and when to use bioengineering practices. It goes over case studies. And the best thing about it is that it is all focused on Vermont. All of the examples and all of the photos are from Vermont. So you don't have to think, oh, this is in the Great Lakes, like this is going to be different than what I would want to do here on like a smaller lake, or, you know, oh, it's from Florida, like they have completely different weather. You know, it is Vermont focused. And it's a great resource. It's available online. There's a link here, and Tom has a PDF of this presentation, so you all have the link. It's also available in hard copy. If anybody wants a copy, best thing to do is probably just email me and I'll mail it to you. It's a really great resource. I would say it's probably a stronger resource for contractors than it is for homeowners, just because the scope of the projects that it goes over, they're pretty big scale projects, but anybody's welcome to have one of these.
This is now mentioned in our, or will be mentioned in our bylaws.
That was one of the
This
changes.
is, yeah, this is one of the.
Okay, good.
So this is gonna be referenced in our bylaws once we go through a second revision process and all that kind of stuff, Allison. So it's a really, really valuable manual.
It is. It has been very helpful to me over the years. So let's talk a little bit about what kinds of projects are listed in the Vermont Bioengineering Manual for shoreline restoration. This is a list of them. I'm going to go through them one by one. The only ones that I didn't do their own slides for are slope regrading and stone toe, because those are usually not done on their own. They're usually incorporated into other practices. So like the stone toe, for example, I'm going to talk about it with the fiber coir rolls. So if anyone has any questions about any of them, you know, please let me know, but they should all get covered in the next couple of slides. So fiber coir logs are the first bioengineering practice listed, and these are coconut fiber rolls. That's what I guess you can't probably see me with my mouse. That's the long brown thing. And it's made of coconut husks. It's a biodegradable roll. And the stone toe is the stone below it. These are really well suited for low to moderate energy sites where the slope and toe stabilization is required in conjunction with other restoration practices, including like regrading the slope, live staking, and other plantings. So this really only works if you put plants behind it, because the whole point of the coir log and the wooden stakes and all of that is that it will decompose over time. So in like 5 to 7 years, probably, that will have completely sort of biodegraded. And the vegetation that was planted behind it is really what's holding in the shoreline. The coir log is really only there to protect the plants when they're young. And that's to protect them from waves and from ice, and let them establish. So you'll see coir logs again. And then that stone toe, which I said didn't have its own slide, that's placed in the water with it's in and out of the water on the water's edge in order to kind of break waves and protect the entire planting. This is a before and after. So this is a before of a beach on Salem Lake. And this damage was caused by ice and by waves, but I think mostly by ice. And this is the after picture of the coir log that was installed and the plantings behind it. This slope was also regraded prior to any of the planting happening. You'll notice there's no stone toe here. That is because it was on a beach. And so it was deemed that stones wouldn't really be necessary since the water level was below the actual practice. So yeah, that's a nice little before and after. The next practice is a live crib wall. Now there's only one of these that I know of in Vermont, but they are basically built terraces using wood and then filling in like the terraced steps with soil and putting plants in them. These also will eventually decompose, but they last for a much longer period of time because they are using wood instead of fiber coirs. This is the example that I have, the only one that I know of.
There's almost two in Vermont now,
Oh,
almost.
you guys have one out there?
It should be finished this summer.
Excellent. This is at the Waterbury Reservoir, which is where the other one that I know of is. And they're really great for areas that have like where the bank isn't receiving a ton of heavy wave action, but there is little like vegetation. So you're trying to get vegetation to establish. It's also a great choice for like high traffic foot areas, you know, people trying to get down to the water or up from the water, because they do have those steps in the middle of them. So you can kind of filter people through the steps and keep the sides vegetated. And it's all very structural and it's good for areas where you kind of want that more of like a structured feel. So that is that example. Next up, we have encapsulated soil lifts. These are probably my favorite bioengineering practice because I think the before and afters are so dramatic and it's just very cool the way it all works together. So encapsulated soil lifts are, again, we're sort of like terracing, but instead of sloping backwards and like regrading backwards towards the shore, encapsulated soil lifts allow for building out towards the water into the lake. They are used when sloping backwards isn't really an option because of roads or other infrastructure, tight spaces. And so they work really well. I've seen them used a lot on roadsides. Vermont has a lot of roads that go right along the shoreline of many lakes, and those can get really undercut. If you remember those photos of the undercutting, the water will actually be lapping right at the edge of the road. And so instead of dumping a bunch of riprap, encapsulated soil lifts can be used to rebuild the road's edge and add in a bunch of protective vegetation. Where they are not appropriate is for vertical drops of more than 12 to 15 feet. That's for two reasons. One is because at that height, to build out the slope, you'd be encroaching more than 30 feet into the lake, which is likely not a permittable activity under our laws. And the second is that the higher you build them, there's an increased weight, and that weight can weaken the soil layers below it. And so you kind of risk it all kind of collapsing on itself. So you can't build these too tall. But most of them that I've seen are about 3 stacks, which is probably, I don't know, 10 feet maybe. I'll show you some more before and after pictures using encapsulated soil lifts. This is a project we completed last fall at Crystal Lake State Park. So you can see I used the before picture when we talked about scour in the beginning. That part of the beach was getting totally scoured out. And the middle picture is during the process. I believe this was after we had regraded and added the stone toe, but before we'd added the encapsulated soil lifts. And then you'll see it was just 2 lifts because it was not a very steep slope. So you'll see the 2 lifts on the picture on the right. You can't see very well the plantings, but I promise that there are plants in there. You have to, just like with the coir logs, you have to use plants with these as well, because again, the encapsulated soil lifts are going to decompose and the plants will be what's left. And without the plants to protect it, they could also get washed away by upland stormwater. So I have another example of encapsulated soil lifts just because I talked about how great they are for roadways. you can see this is a picture from Lake Bomazine. This road was getting undercut by the lake pretty extremely. I wish I had a picture of it from the water so you could see just how far in that that undercutting goes. But this area was rebuilt using encapsulated soil lifts, and it is a very robust vegetated lakeshore buffer today. And that buffer protects the road from having this exact same thing happen to it again. So that's encapsulated soil lifts. And finally, live stakes. I unfortunately don't have I couldn't find a good real picture of live stakes, but live stakes are basically, it's almost always willow stakes, but I think sometimes you can use dogwood as well. And you can cut branches off of willows or dogwoods and pound them into the ground basically, and they'll root because willows have a ton of rooting hormone. So they root very quickly and easily. And there's two different ways that you can kind of use live stakes. One is as a part of a bigger project. So I think both of the encapsulated soil lift pictures I showed you had live stakes in them. That's because willows are really easy to get. Like I said, you can harvest them from a live willow tree, or not tree, like a bush. And they root really, really fast. And so whereas some other plants may take some time to establish, willows within one season are going to start really doing some work. I also think that they're really great to use on small areas of erosion. So let's say you have a mostly stable shoreline, but you've got one spot, kind of like I showed you in the beginning, that rill erosion, it's all kind of going to one spot. You can use live stakes in just that spot to kind of patch up the hole. And that's really great for when you don't want to have to regrade and you don't want to have to like remove a bunch of vegetation in order to fix a problem. You can get in really tight areas with willows and put them in by hand. And it is a really great way to fix small problems. So next up, I wanted to show a couple of photos of sort of the different levels of erosion. So different than the different types, this is like a little bit of erosion, a medium amount of erosion, and a lot of erosion. And I'm going to talk about each of them a little bit and maybe what I think would be the fix. So here you can kind of see this is a public, somewhat public shared access area for like a homeowners association. They launch boats from here, and I think it's all foot traffic. When I say boats, I mean kayaks and canoes. And I think it's all foot traffic down to the water here, but you can see that there's some erosion happening at the area where they're accessing the water. And this is a close-up picture of some of that. So this is real erosion. It's coming from upland stormwater, probably, except that because they're launching kayaks here, I think it's made worse by moving boats up and down in this spot. So it's probably a combination of both things. It's a small amount of erosion. If I had determined that it was coming from upland stormwater, I would say the first fix, I'll go back to the original picture here, would be to divert stormwater at the top of that hill off of the trail or road or whatever you want to call that, maybe by using some means, an open top culvert, a water bar or something like that. And then it would really be, because this is an access point, probably to designate one spot as the access area and not the part that's eroding, and replant that with some vegetation. That's probably what I would do here. This is that same example from before that I showed you for real erosion. This is a spot where I would use maybe live stakes if regrading wasn't something that the owner was interested in doing. It is such a small area that live staking might stop any further erosion. If they really wanted it to look nice, they would probably have to regrade it and then plant it. So it would just depend on what their primary goal was here. This is an example of some moderate erosion. This is likely also coming from upland stormwater, I would guess. Maybe a little bit from waves. Sometimes you have two things happening at once. You've got water coming from the upland and water coming from wave action from the lake. This is one where I'd probably suggest regrading and planting and maybe using that coir log, maybe a stone toe, in order to make sure that this doesn't happen this way again. Similarly, here's another before and after. Again, this is a town beach. where they were definitely dealing with upland stormwater erosion. You can't see it, but this property slopes pretty steeply down towards the town beach. And so the fix here was to put in this buffer planting. It's got a coir log on one end. It's very similar to the one that I showed you in the beginning of Salem Lake, except that the problem here wasn't ice. The problem here was the upland stormwater. After this practice was installed, they also installed a vegetative swale uphill from this that helped curtail that stormwater even more. Finally, we've got some large scale erosion. These are the ones where, to be honest with you, sometimes there isn't a bioengineering solution. Sometimes the project or the problem is so big that the solution is going to be difficult to find. So for something like this, it's probably being caused by access. It's probably being caused by people scrambling up on that bank. The solution might be to figure out how to stop people from accessing this point and letting it revegetate naturally. But it's difficult in a situation like this one where people are accessing it from the water to even get in there to do any kind of work. This example is from North Hero, I think. It's definitely from somewhere on the islands. And
That's our project. Yeah, I know that. I know that picture.
so this is, you can see the exposed bedrock. It's a very steep drop. There's lots of exposed soil, and this is on a private residence. And in another spot, they had a retaining wall, and I don't know that there's anything that they can do bioengineering wise to really solve this problem. The only thing that I would recommend in these situations is to make sure that your vegetated buffer on the upland side there is robust. In this case, it is. There's tons of mature trees up there. And so vegetatively, that's the only thing I can really tell them to do. Something like a retaining wall or riprap or something like that could probably be used here. I don't know how effective that would actually be because it is kind of a sheer drop off. So this is just to illustrate that there are some cases where the erosion is so bad that bioengineering practices are not going to be enough to help, and you're looking at like hard armoring practices, unfortunately. So I thought what I would do now is kind of go back. I'm just gonna take some water. Go back to the first examples of erosion and see if and kind of tell you for each of these what bioengineering practice would I use here. And sorry, I'm just going to click right through all these slides. Okay. Oh, geez. It's just going on its own now. So we already talked about these rill and gully erosion and this one. So here we used encapsulated soil lifts for scour erosion. That wouldn't necessarily always be what you would use. Sometimes you might just regrade and add a coir log. Here we talked about using live stakes, which is what I think would be really useful, or a combination of live stakes and regrading. For ice push, ice can be really difficult to deal with. What I would probably do here is regrade the lawn, put in a stone toe, probably a robust stone toe, because that stone is going to send the ice up and over the stone and hopefully over the lawn and any plants that are there as well. So a robust stone toe, a coir log, and plantings behind it is what I would probably attempt in a situation like this. For undercutting, almost always encapsulated soil lifts if you can't regrade, and where you have mature trees, it can be, you can kind of work around mature trees with an encapsulated soil lift, but if you have to regrade everything, you're just going to end up taking all those trees down. These are really hard to deal with, these mass wasting events. This project, I believe they're trying to do a big planting in this area to try to keep the soil where it is now, and so it doesn't further slough off. That's going to be really hard because, like I said, I think this is Orwell or Benson. It's really clay soil there, so plantings might be a little bit hard, but we're going to see what happens. Outfall, scours, the best thing to do is to not put pipes like this. But the second best thing to do would be to put would be to put some stone at the outfall to kind of break the fall of the water, not make it hit the ground so hard, protect the soil from getting hit. So we've all kind of seen those culverts that empty into like a pool with rocks. That's sort of what I would suggest in this case if you've already got a perched pipe. The less perched the pipe could be, the better. And finally, bare soil and lack of vegetation, I'm always going to recommend a vegetative buffer. So any kind of planting, trees, shrubs, perennials, anything that's not grass is what I would suggest. All right. Now that I've gone through this PowerPoint twice, I will just say a little bit about vegetative buffers. When I'm looking at projects, there's all of the bioengineering and then there's vegetative buffers. And I kind of think of them as two different types of projects, even though they all fall under shoreland project types. There does not need to be active erosion happening in order for a buffer to get planted. A buffer can be thought of as like preventative almost. I would love it if every shoreland property had a vegetative buffer on it because they're good for protecting the lake and water quality. They're great wildlife habitat. They can protect the property, especially since we are having so many more flooding events and things like that. Roots are really the best way of holding a shoreline together. So I am, not surprisingly, all for buffers. For our buffer project type for shoreland, we're looking for a 15-foot minimum buffer. But there is a little bit of wiggle room there because it can be really difficult to get 15 feet of buffer on some lakeshore properties. A lot of lakeshore houses are right up against the water. So it can be a little bit difficult, but I've worked with lots of people to come to a happy agreement. So this is an example of a property where there's not a lot of erosion happening. Maybe there's a little bit at the shoreline, but you've got lawn all the way down to the lake. No plants, no buffer, and plenty of space. So a buffer could get put in here. And it's something that DEC pays for people to add vegetative buffers to their lakeshore properties. Here's another example. Here, there might be even more erosion because there is more of a significant drop down to the water, and bare soil here as well. So you have all the components for some pretty gnarly erosion to happen. I would suggest a vegetative buffer. We really want properties to go from looking like this to this, or this, or this, or this. Beautiful lakeshore properties, great buffers, protecting water quality, and creating habitat. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before I open this up for questions, what about upland stormwater, right? Like there's a lot of stormwater that comes from around our houses, that comes from roads. Any kind of impervious surface is going to create runoff. That is true. And there are project types within the clean water funding world that can address some of those upland stormwater issues. Those are things like rain gardens, bioretention areas, and swales. The reason I didn't talk about those today is because those are technically stormwater project types and not lakeshore project types, even though you can do a stormwater project within a lakeshore area. So those are things that can be funded through the clean water funding programs. And I'm happy to talk more about them if that's of interest to you. I just wanted to mention that those are things that can be done and can be paid for through the state. I also would be, remiss to not put a plug out for the Lakewise program. That is a free technical assistance program that I also happen to run, where we do assessments for homeowners looking at where stormwater is going on their property and write up a report with all sorts of suggestions about how those issues can be fixed. If there is a fundable project at a Lakewise assessment, I will work with landowners to put them in touch with partners who can help them to get funding for those projects if they come up during Lakewise assessments. It's a great resource. It's free. It's non-regulatory. Tell your friends. So all that said, thank you so much for having me here today, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. I'm gonna stop
Great
sharing.
presentation.
Yeah.
Great presentation.
Excellent.
Allison. I'm curious, is this a new presentation or have you been using this?
Oh yeah, I made this today.
Wow.
So-
Wow, great.
Because, I mean, I think you should present this to every Basin Water Quality Council. I'm dead serious.
Yeah.
We've been looking at the sheets and all the wording, and for like 3 years, we've had almost no pictures.
Oh,
This was great. This was absolutely great. So I really appreciate it.
there you go.
Um,
Tell the book. I'll present to them.
Okay, all right, we're gonna get you to at least one. Any questions from around the
Just
table?
the live stake method, you know, if it's gonna be willow branches or whatever, those eventually become huge trees, right? Do they tend to crowd each other out over time, or how does
That's a
that
good
work? Yeah,
The willows, we're not, when you're live staking, you're not using like a willow tree, like a big willow tree. They're more like the bushy, like pussy
Okay.
willows or things like that.
okay.
And I
Yeah.
think there is a spacing guideline in the bioengineering manual of how far apart. It's maybe a foot or 2 feet, or yeah, maybe more than that. But no, I think that they kind of grow up all together and don't
Okay.
crowd each other out.
Thank you.
Allison, hi, I'm in the peanut gallery. And I recently came across something called the Whisper funding program. Are you familiar with that?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah,
It's
that's
for
kind of,
municipalities, I think, right?
yeah. And I just wondered if you knew anything about it, or we could talk about that, or it sounds like it's kind of nascent.
I don't know a ton about it, except that I do know the person who runs it, and I know it's been used. Gosh, it was used in some town down here to do something with a reservoir, some like drinking water thing. But I can put you in touch with the right person if you're interested in learning more about that. I don't know any details, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I've got the right person, but I just want to introduce it to the town sometime. Because
Yeah,
we do have,
good.
the idea is that, tell me if I'm wrong, but if the municipality has some water projects going, you can tie conservation projects to it. And the municipality will get cheaper funding, cheaper loans that will cover the cost of the conservation work.
Oh, interesting,
So it just bundles things.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good to know.
Does that sound about right, or
Approximately, I think so.
you need to know
Um,
more, figure it out? Yeah. Okay, good, thanks.
Anybody else? I have a couple questions, but I want to see if anybody else does. So Allison, can you just help differentiate between, an engineered seawall, riprap, and then using more like, I think you called them the natural stone and that sort of thing. And maybe a little bit where it seems like definitely there's a tendency not to want to permit a seawall. Riprap kind of falls in the middle, like it's kind of okay, but we'd rather you didn't do it. And then what maybe we should do from a natural shoreline control. If you could just differentiate between those three.
Yeah. Well, a seawall or a retaining wall is going to be a large structure. It's going to be completely hard. When waves hit it, they're going to rebound off of it, which can cause erosion on either side and either end of the wall. I wish I was with you so I could show you exactly the motion that waves make when they're rebounding off of a hard surface. But it will cause erosion on the ends of that or on the neighbor's property. Riprap is, like you said, kind of a middle ground where you have large or from medium to large stones, depending on what kind of a project you're doing. And I guess the idea with that is that it's not totally hard, like water can kind of go into the crevices. So it doesn't create as much of like a pushback as a wall would, and might be able to absorb more of that energy. And in some cases, plants will grow up through riprap, or you can even plant things in riprap. But it is still not like it doesn't create any habitat for one thing. And it doesn't do as good of a job of holding in the soil as something like a root structure might do. You can still over time kind of get erosion with riprap. And then the bioengineering methods, I said, you know, there's a stone toe for a lot of them, and all of them are trying to absorb that wave energy and kind of break it so that what's behind it isn't going to get hit as hard, kind of acts like a shield. And so a stone toe would do the same thing. It's just a much more minimal line that kind of mimics what some like rocky shorelines look like. And it protects the vegetation that's behind it, but then the vegetation is what's really holding in the soil. So it's a smaller line of rocks to protect the practice behind it. So that's how I would kind of explain the differences between the three. And yeah, I mean, I will definitely say that I think that bioengineered methods and vegetative methods are preferred over definitely seawalls. Those new ones don't get permitted often anymore. And then riprap, kind of a middle ground.
I mean, we just had you saw it, Andy, we just had a private residence do a riprap wall, sort of thing. And what I don't know is if they considered, natural, control methods, but nonetheless, so that was kind of a curious question there.
That's the one you're thinking about? Yeah.
I saw that. I'm just curious.
So maybe jumping on the culvert thing a little bit, because I know North Hero, I can count probably 6 that look like that picture that you showed us. Now what's below them, I think in some cases, maybe there are some like rocks to keep it flowing. So obviously the outlet and it's hitting and eroding, we might have one of those at Pilots. And then what about the upstream? Are there any issues with the upstream of a culvert? Because they're kind of channeling water. Is that anything to be concerned about?
If we're talking about like a road culvert, which I think we probably are, is it a concern? I mean, practically no, because the water has to go somewhere and under the road is where it's going. And that's probably not going to change. So making sure that kind of the best thing we can do is make sure that where the outflow goes isn't going to be eroding and that anything upstream isn't eroding. I think stopping the sources of erosion, and then we'll curtail the transport of sediments through that culvert. You know, if we were starting from scratch and there was no road, maybe we would say, oh, it's not a good idea to put this, you know, stream through a culvert or this ditch water the way that it's going. But once things are established, we kind of have to work within the framework of what exists. So
That was Ingles, right?
Right.
So we were talking about putting a berm in front of the culvert and then putting a rain garden behind it so that it absorbs the water before it even gets to the culvert, because the culvert just drops on and down onto the lake,
Right.
basically.
Yeah. So that'll be, no, we should look at that project.
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit, Allison, because I kind of know the answer to this, but because now what we're hoping happens is, we'll be out there, maybe see some projects. I've got already a couple in my head and so on and so forth, and Jean does and that. What role do you want to play in this, or what role should you play if we think we have a bunch of projects to look at?
So if you're going to, well, I'll say 2 things. One, I'm always happy to look at any project that anyone has, because I think it's fun and interesting. But especially if you're going to be advancing something for funding, it is really good to put it in front of me and maybe the basin planner. It's Karen out there, I think.
Yeah.
Just to make sure, you know, things are fundable, things are possible, you know, like, oh, you know, encapsulated soil lifts won't actually work here for XYZ reason or whatever. I think it's good to involve at least the 2 of us from the beginning, just so that you're not like all the way through a grant application before you find out that something's wrong or something like that. So I'm always happy to look at projects.
Well, thank you. Because I think people have seen a couple times now through Front Porch Forum and so on and so forth. There's been like, hey, bring us your projects. Northwest Regional Planning has requested, and part of this was to be like, nobody really knows what the project is. Right? And now I think we have actually a much better idea. I
Yeah,
think the
for sure.
pictures were great. So no, good. Any other questions? I should look at, oh, we're doing great on time.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we're good.
We have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
One quick one this is left over from where I used to live in the Mad River Valley. And the Mad River Valley slowly gave way to knotweed everywhere along the rivers. And
Mhm.
knotweed just does not hold the soil or the banks at all. Do you worry about that or deal with, invasives like that and replacing them, trying to get rid of them and replace them with better things?
Yeah, invasive species can be really hard, terrestrial invasives. There's a couple reasons for that. One is that it's not like a fundable project type to get rid of invasive species, so it's kind of up to the landowners to do it. And it can be a really big undertaking. Like you said, knotweed is really hard to get rid of. And it is really terrible at stabilizing banks. Luckily, I have not come across too much knotweed on lakes. It's really easy for knotweed to travel down rivers, just because of the way that it detaches from the main plant, and then each part of that plant can root. And every time we have a flood, you're just sending knotweed down the river. Because lakes are a little more, well, maybe not Lake Champlain, but other lakes are more self-contained. You don't have the introduction of knotweed as much, and you have more things like milfoil and stuff like that. Um, Other terrestrial invasives, one of the ones I do see a lot of is Phragmites. That's your common reed, and it is pervasive. And it is difficult to get rid of. And there's a couple projects happening right now on Lake Champlain where not Lake Champlain, I'm sorry, Lake Memphremagog, where the Memphremagog Watershed Association is working on removing Phragmites and then replanting with something else to compete basically with any Phragmites that is left. It is really difficult to do. A lot of the time, the thing that it's going to kill invasives is going to be herbicide, and a lot of people don't like using herbicide or don't like using it near the water, which I totally understand. But if you don't go the herbicide route, you're looking at many years of hand pulling as probably going to be the most effective way of getting rid of it. So I do worry about it, and I don't have a good solution for it. I would say things like barberry or honeysuckle, it's better to cut them down than to pull them out. That is one thing that I will say, because those roots are going to be stabilizing the shoreline at least a little bit. So if you cut them down and you keep them cut down, that's the best way to handle it, but leave the roots in. So something else can establish while those roots are holding the soil.
Yeah, I'm just sensitive to it because of what happened to our farm in the
Yeah.
Mad River Valley. And I know where the spots are on the island, and there aren't that many, but I'm thinking, man, if we could get this stuff under control, what a difference it would make. So
One cool thing you can do with knotweed is that you can inject it with herbicide, so that you don't have to spray it everywhere. And they actually make like little injector guns for this. I know down where I live, there's a town that has them, and you have to inject them like into the stem one by one, but it's much more controlled use of herbicide that can work really effectively to kill them if you've got small stands of it.
get 500 volunteers and go ahead, right? So, thanks much. Sorry.
Any final questions? Allison, thank you very much. I'm gonna be in touch because I think we want to take this presentation on the road. It was great.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's absolutely great. And I'll make sure at least Basin 5 hears about it. But thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Allison.
All right. Take care.
You're welcome to stay for the rest, but now it's just we got to adjourn and we have to do one other thing.
I think I'm gonna take off, but
Great.
nice
Thank you.
to see you all. Okay. Bye-bye.
I think we have. All right, good. Excellent. So there's nothing to report on the project, other than, at least 3 or 4 techniques that Allison showed could potentially be done for the 200 feet of P lots. I mean, it's interesting, like, I know we've been building up, stockpiles of riprap. We'll have to see where that falls into the mix. But we're just waiting for the water to be at the right level for the engineering firm to come out and look at it.
Yep.
That's it for projects. Any other business? Motion to adjourn?
Do you want to talk about the next event?
Yeah, so as a follow-up to this, Cliff Jenkins, so I think he'll help tie a few more pieces there. Cliff Jenkins from Northwest Regional Planning is going to be kind of doing the same thing Allison did. He'll probably come in person because it's part of his job to interact with the towns. I'm thinking either the 13th or actually this meeting next month, which he's available. And I actually think this works out better.
Yeah.
And so he's gonna kind of tie what Allison presented to what is the QUISP, the Clean Water Service Provider. What's his role in working with the municipalities and Allison to take these projects into a funding mode, basically. So that's kind of, he's going to present a little bit of, hey, here's what a project looks like, but then most of it's going to be Clean Water Service Provider. Here's what Northwest Regional Planning is doing to help find projects, and then help either the town or Northwest Regional Planning propose to the Clean Water Service Provider or the enhancement block grant to get projects moving. And they're pretty good. They have the resources to write proposals and all that kind of stuff. So I think he will be a good resource for us. And he's set up in an interesting way because he can also get funds from Northwest Regional Planning Commission, because he's kind of established himself as he's there, but he helps the municipalities, and then he can go to Northwest Regional Planning. That's the same thing. So hopefully he'll tie the whole event together in terms of this funding sitting out there and how do we actually go get it type sort of stuff.
Great. And then what about the May event at the community hall? We have this offer from Misha to do a presentation on the Shoreland Protection Act again.
Yeah, and I think we can probably accomplish both. I think we can do both. The Lakewise, because so Allison wants to now present on Lakewise specifically. I think we're up to like 20, which is pretty impressive in the town of North Hero. So she wants to present solely on Lakewise. So I think, and they work together. So I think we can do a Lakewise and the program that's very similar to what Misha gave last year in terms of the permitting and fielding questions and so on and so forth.
I was just thinking that program was so rich and had so much participation that we should probably separate these two events.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that, because then we have the Friends event in June.
And what is the Friends event? How is that different from the Lakewise event?
The Friends was what they call the Shoreline Social. There was a Lakewise component to it, but not very big. It was mostly Friends talking about, what Friends does in terms of lakes and streams, some of the project identification, more on their outreach. And then there was a breakout session where they I thought it was really good, where they broke into groups and asked the town residents, why do they care about the lake? What do they care about the lake? So on and so forth. So it really had a very small Lakewise component to it. And the goal with Lakewise is to kick things off, is to get people to sign up so that we can do Lakewise throughout the rest of the summer. So that's, instead of doing it in August, which I think they did last time, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to get signed up and get the Lakewise programs done.
So Tom, it's more about these presentations will build upon one another, right? So if people come to the Lakewise, then they may get motivated, then they may come to the next one to really discuss, like, kind of try to get them
If-
involved. Is that kind of?
I'm
the
not
evolution?
quite sure it was that strategic, but yeah.
It's like it's building, you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
seems like it might build on one another.
Yeah, I think they do.
Right. But I think that we don't necessarily benefit from cramming too much content into a single event.
Yeah, but we don't have a lot of time either. I mean, I don't necessarily want to do 3 events in May.
No, but why don't we do we could do Misha's event in May. And then we could do the Lakeshore event in June. And then we could do the social in July.
How long are these, the meetings are an hour or more?
Well, that's fine. Like
Is there enough content to? I don't know.
Misha easily, because he gets a lot of
Questions.
questions from the town. But he could easily, I mean, his event was technically 30 minutes and questions went on for probably 15 or 20.
And the advantage of doing Misha first is that for folks that are considering construction, right, especially for the seasonal folks, like they're coming and getting situated in May, right? Like that's the perfect time to start talking about you know, what kind of application process you have to do with the state, right?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is the Lakewise helps with a lot of that.
Yeah.
Because it really establishes, because right now people go and, hey, I want to permit this. And that's kind of like the riprap thing. I don't know this at all. If they would have done a Lakewise event, they might have considered some different
Oh, I
events.
think the people that we get at Misha's event are people who, you know, like want to build extensions on their house.
Felt like at his event, there was a lot of upset people that wanted more of the reporting and they wanted to like report their neighbor.
Yeah.
Like, that 20 to 30 minutes, I was like shocked at the venomous conversation.
Yeah.
It seemed to kind of like derail like his message. a little.
Well, yeah, and so
Maybe that was just me and other
so,
people got a different impression, that's fine.
so let me see how long Allison's Lakewise presentation is, because I wouldn't want to put her after Misha,
Right.
but we could put Misha after her.
I still think it's a mistake to put both on the same night.
I don't have Allison's already committed to the 29th because Misha couldn't.
But Misha has, and we could ask Allison to move to June.
And we can ask Misha to move to June too. So let me see what Allison presentation looks like. And then we kind of have a feel for what Misha's look like and we can go from there.
And does anybody else feel like it's smart to do both events at the same night?
No, if neither one of them are particularly long, you know. I don't have a problem with it.
Might get better attendance, right? I mean, if you do them both together, maybe it's a little bit of content for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, again, are you talking Allison's presentation she just did?
No,
Oh, there's a whole different.
there's a whole different one, just
Yeah,
that's right. Last year
It didn't seem long.
Yeah, I didn't. think
last
so,
year we
yeah.
did,
So it's basically the same thing as last year with Misha and Allison. I'm
but
trying to
we had
remember.
somebody else.
Oh, was it somebody? Because there was two people that did
Yeah.
two different presentations. It didn't seem long, but
Right,
Yeah, it worked out fine.
yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, my take on it was that Misha's event was a really robust event with about a 45-minute presentation and lots of questions, and about 40 people showed up. And I think that we have a real incentive to make that timing earlier rather than later, because that's when folks are considering doing construction and that's when they need to learn about how to permit with the state. So I think it's a really timely you know, topic, and that it's robust, and I don't see a reason for us to crowd these events. The whole point is to have multiple events and to engage folks.
Yeah, but people have limited time too. And we had 2 presenters last time,
I
and it
wonder-
actually, I think it makes that because then otherwise.
Two
we're gonna have
presenters with
likewise-
Misha?
Yeah, we had another presenter with
Yeah.
Misha.
Yeah, we did.
And then otherwise,
Oh.
we're gonna have like, I can't remember off
It
the
was
top of my
two
head.
different presentations.
No, I
Yeah.
think it was 2 presenters at the Lakewise event. Misha, that was just like, first of all, his presentation is long, and then we had lots of questions.
So David, I'm curious what your thoughts would be. We talked a little bit today about the riprap photo you showed earlier, Andy.
Yeah.
Do you think, David, that those folks that are looking for a permit, if we did Allison first, might consider doing their project differently? If we had her
Absolutely.
first, right? So if we had her first in May, and then the permitting, would they maybe consider, oh, you know what, I was gonna do this and try to get a permit for this. But then if we had Allison later, then, oh, I should have done that, that would have been better. I don't know, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are around that, David. If you think we could influence people to make different choices if they have the information from Allison prior to.
I think it's a great question, Missy. And my first thought is that we're just working with the constraints of people's availability for when they can present. But my second thought is that people who are thinking about construction on the waterfront, right? That really is a different conversation than the shoreland, like what do you do for shoreland buffers?
See, I'm just saying, I just completed stuff. I would have done a different construction if Lakewise hadn't showed up.
All right, well,
Hands down.
if I'm the
Yeah.
only one who feels this way, I'm happy to cede the the stage here, but I think we've got a lot of content, and I don't think we need to push it all into the same event. But if other people feel like that's the most effective way to do this, I'm happy to let it go.
We can leave it to the experts. Allison and Misha work together.
Yeah,
Right.
And I'll just simply talk to them and say, hey, we have a 2-hour slot.
What
How would
makes the
you,
most
it's
sense?
not like they haven't done this before. I've seen both of them in presentations and
the
they,
other consideration is. we
Oh, they
get
typically
more-
present together?
absolutely.
Yeah, we
Oh,
would
I
get
didn't know that.
more people to view both presentations than if
Yeah.
we had them separately.
Yeah.
Right, to Missy's point.
Yeah.
All right. So Tom, you'll bring this up with Misha and with,
Yeah. And I'll ask them, like, how would they structure it? But I've been to presentations where they've both been there.
great.
And-
And we have the time scheduled for the community hall for both May
Right.
and June.
And the Lakewise goes very well, and the Lakewise goes well, and then Misha takes off, and his is very good. But then towards the end, all people want to do is complain, which
Yeah.
is fine, and he handles it well,
Yeah, he does.
but you wouldn't want to put him first.
Right, because I think he was first last time, and somebody had to shut him down. I don't remember who was like, okay, we're gonna move on.
I know,
One
it's so
more.
funny. I don't even remember him presenting with somebody else.
David, I think this is really good conversation. I think it's good that you brought it up. It challenges us
Yeah.
to really think about what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I think that was good. It's good conversation.
So I'll talk to them and see, they might say, no, it's a bad idea, then
Yeah.
we can go from there.
Okay,
Right now, so tentatively, we're going to have Cliff at our next meeting. I would like to try to get like select board and Danielle is, I think, critical to be here. If we can maybe tweak her arm to
Yeah.
come to the event, because she sees it all. She may not want to, but she sees all this
Yeah.
stuff. It's almost.
yeah,
impossible.
I'm gonna be meeting with her Friday. I will talk to her about it.
Other than that, any other items?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right,
Done.
great,
Thank you.
Stuff.
excellent.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, David.